There's about 6,000 Indigenous people in Canada diagnosed with HIV. This sort of brutalization of Indigenous people, whether it's homelessness or lack of housing or lack of clean water or infectious diseases, it's a product of colonialism. Infectious diseases are a tool of genocide. This is a time to stop, take stock, and think as Canadians, who are we and how do we want to go into the future collectively with Indigenous people? My name is Albert McLeod. I come from northern Manitoba, a little village called Cormorant, which is on the Hudson's Bay line that goes from the Paw to Churchill, Manitoba. I grew up there in the 1950s, early 1960s, so my early experience is very much a land-based experience. My heritage is Scottish settler who were men who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company in the late 1800s, the tail end of the fur trade in Canada, as well as the Cree people, the Swampy Cree and the Woodland Cree, who also worked in the Hudson Bay fur trade as trappers. It's been, quite a range of experiences I've had with CAAN, which has really been about my experience in society. I'm 67 years old now, and I began the work in the Indigenous community when I was 24. And that meant moving to Vancouver in 1979 and being in the midst of the outbreak of HIV globally. So my trajectory since then has been, responding to HIV/AIDS since then, but also in terms of cultural reclamation, in terms of identity, sexual health, indigeneity, ceremony, spirituality, Indigenous philosophy. Being in the gay community in Winnipeg and in Vancouver at the time, we realized the impact that it was having on our own peers, our own friends who were being diagnosed with AIDS early on in the 80s, mid-80s, early 90s. I came back to Manitoba in 1983 in an effort to run away from the virus of HIV once it was known that it was sexually transmitted or could be transmitted through contact with blood, like injection drug use. By 1986, a friend had come back from Vancouver in the end stage of AIDS. So I realized it was not something that we could outrun. Many of my friends died over the last 40 years. No one has said their name. There's no grave, there's no headstone, there's no memory. They're eventually erased from history. And that is genocide, and that is colonization, that is anti-Indigenous racism. That my friends who are gay or bisexual, they lived, they had childhoods, they went to school, they had names, they had visions and dreams of a future. Yet they have been totally erased over the last 40 years. And that's wrong. That is morally and ethically wrong. I remember my friends and the regrets I have today where I couldn't help them or I wouldn't help them, of my own fears, my own bias around HIV and AIDS, and their journey, their struggle at the time. And so that's why for me is I speak, despite the stigma, despite the isolation, the rejection, or the shaming, I speak. Because we're in an era of truth. What happened to me, to my friends, is the truth. One of my friends is Jerry Bryden. He didn't die from HIV or AIDS, but he died from the impact of losing his friends. He was the leader in Winnipeg's Pride March, the first Pride March in 1987. And sadly, in 1993, he took his life in Vancouver. And it's because I think his world was destroyed by HIV and AIDS. The world he thought he had was gone. And there was really no one to talk about that with, right? No one to understand what he was going through. My friend Claire Burns lived in Winnipeg. She was 31 when she died of HIV. And it was one of those situations where I couldn't or wouldn't help her. And there's a lot of regret around that, that my life was going forward and suddenly she was dealing with this devastating diagnosis that was so stigmatized and there was no way out. Pamela Blaney, she wasn't Indigenous. She was the first woman in Manitoba to speak about living with HIV. And she came to many First Nations with me and talked about having HIV. And similarly with her, when she died, no one really took notice of her contribution as a hero in Winnipeg's history. Just so many. Together we counted up about 60 people who we knew in the early 80s, who died during that era. In the north, out of 5, 1 has gravestone. There's nothing on their grave. There's no way you would know who's buried there. So we're forgetting, right? We're forgetting. So to me, it really is about remembering them and the little bit that they were able to do at the time to help, right? Whether it was CAAN, whether it was an AIDS service organization, or making a video, or going to a conference, or being part of a research project, that contribution is sacred. Because, many of them have passed away to the spirit world 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And to me, they're sacred beings now. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is that healing that occurs, that resilience that occurs. And CAAN taught me to be resilient, especially Roger Roulette about the Ojibwe teachings of the life philosophy. The term is Minaguizi Win. It means given or received from the divine. And that means as humans, we have that capacity to vision, to petition, to invoke the natural world, the spiritual world, and ask for what we need, and we will receive. And I think that's been my experience in CAAN, is to let go of these formal frameworks that we're taught in school and university about logic models and justice and health, and believe in your own inherent capacity to ask the universe for what you need, and it will come. And when CAAN was first, created here in Manitoba, it began with a sweat lodge that Dr. Myra Laramie held for us. So ceremony and spirituality have been always part of our coming together as communities, because we're very diverse across Canada. From coast to coast to coast, we all have different historical experiences, traditions, languages, but it's the culture and ceremonies that keep us together. It is that safe place to share, to be present, and to heal together. For many HIV positive people who are Indigenous, it's that same journey. When you connect with community, when you connect with that spirituality, you will be in places that you could never believe you would have ended up. And some of these places are fantastic places. This last year, I was in Albuquerque. I was in the United Nations in New York. Last year, I was in Gravesend outside of London visiting Pocahontas' grave. And these are places that I never ever thought I would be. And for many HIV positive people who are Indigenous, it's that same journey. One of my friends graduated with a doctorate years before he was dying of AIDS. It is just having that courage to take that step forward and that faith behind you that you can do it. We stand strong and we stand proud, right? And there is a story to be told.